Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. So today we have this meeting. Actually, it's like a office hour about the AWS. We have two experts from from AWS or Amazon, Hisham Al-Hakimi. Now he's the compliance manager, security, privacy, and compliance engineering at Apple Cloud Service. And the other one is gonna be our friend Hadis Ali. Also, he's a privacy manager at Amazon Web Server. So thank you, Hisham. Thank you, Hadis, to join us and give us this opportunity to tell us more about AWS. And all that stuff's gonna be belong to AWS Yemen user group. This is our third meeting. You can start, Hisham or Hadis, by give us like a brief about you or like about AWS. So now the ball is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. We don't have any content to present a deck, so we'll make this interactive and we'll come on, cam and just give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. We will give you, to start, we'll cover some cloud fundamentals. It's cloud service provider agnostic, so it really is no different whether you're using AWS or GPC or Azure. We want to give you guys concepts around pillars of the cloud or well-architected principles. So we'll cover that, and then Hadis will kind of get into privacy by design, and then we'll get into things like careers in tech. What are your options? As well as certifications and professional education. So thanks, Faris and all the team at the AWS Yemen user group. We're really excited to support you guys and what you're doing to support the students and the young professionals in Yemen, in the Gulf region, and anywhere. So we can, basically try to drive some more support from AWS as well as the broader community. So thank you again for inviting us. So I'll kick it off just talking about, and feel free, raise your hand in Zoom or cut me off. And if you have any questions, just use the functionality in Zoom. Or Faris, maybe you can moderate the chat box. If you see any questions, just let us know.
All right, that's perfect.
Okay,
so you want okay, just a quick question. You want it to be in chat, or they can like interact you and ask you by voice?
Either way. We want to make this is
raise your hand and we're gonna let you know, or you can just write your questions and they're gonna answer it for you.
Yep. And if we don't see it, Faris, if you could just help us monitor the chat window and let us know if you see something in the chat. So to begin, I'll talk a little bit about fundamental cloud principles. Some of them you might have reviewed or learned in previous sessions with the AWS Yemen user group. And these pillars, again, they are not specific to AWS. They are just cloud principles, right? Like we focus on things like operational excellence, security, layered security, reliability and redundancy of the cloud, performance. How do you construct your workloads in a way that is very scalable and efficient? And then things like cost optimization. One of the motivations to move to the cloud is the ability to pay for what you use and to optimize those costs. So we'll kind of we'll go through some of those pillars or the fundamentals of the cloud, and I'll also provide some conceptual examples of those. And then once we do that, I'll speak briefly about the shared responsibility, and then Hadis can kind of tie in a lot of the privacy considerations that are starting to become more prevalent. So beginning just, thinking about operational excellence, how can users, AWS users, or just cloud users in general, create systems that have better procedures and that are insightful, right? And the first thing that usually comes to mind is automation. How do I automate my workload? How do I make sure that we minimize the defects and we minimize operational incidents that can impact the customers. So whenever at any opportunity for automation, you're going to be minimizing the chance for human error, and this is always a good thing. So a lot of cloud service providers, certainly AWS is really a pioneer in this space, is providing toolkits and templates for users to automate their workloads. And you might have heard of the term infrastructure as code, right? So an example of this in an AWS environment is the ability to use CloudFormation templates to begin deploying your infrastructure, or using Cloud Watch and looking at your logs and your analytics and being able to determine your usage patterns. So this second concept of observability, right? So infrastructure and code and observability are things that really tie into how this moves to the cloud. How do we make sure we are operating in a very efficient, excellent manner, and we're minimizing disruptions and minimizing human error? This is one of the biggest goals. And certainly you can do research on these topics. Infrastructure as code, like I said, CloudFormation templates is a good example, or observability, analytics and logs, or CloudWatch and things like that is something that you can read more about. One of the next topic or pillar is, I'm sure it's one of your favorite topics. I know, Fatis, you're very interested in it, and many people these days is the topic of like security, right? Like, how do you make sure your workloads are secure in the cloud, and whether it's physical infrastructure, your software, your networking capabilities. So when we think about security, we think about layered security through the physical security at the data centers, all the way to your network, your network layer, and all the way down to your resources and your policies for just managing access. So usually that mental model will involve adopting this concept of like zero trust, right? Let's assume all the components in our environment are malicious and are potentially malicious entities, and let's try to be very discreet and intentional how we segregate and protect and basically secure our resources. So you have to, when you think about security in the cloud, you have to think about multiple layers, right? It's like a cake, right? You have to, each layer has to be very designed nice and constructed in a nice way that can overall minimize, because if you have a layer at, for example, the data center or the physical layer, it might start from the perimeter. Just, did we have the right perimeter fencing, and did we have the right security there before they can actually go into restricted zones or access certain, the data layer, which would then be the servers and the racks and all that. So, and then the network is a whole different surface area, right? Or the vulnerabilities of a certain software module or hardware module is another layer. So just thinking about security in layers is the right approach. And three, good concepts that should come top of mind, and they're not full list. There's other angles for security. Is identity and access management. How do we, AWS and also some other cloud providers, they use the concept of like principals or resources or accounts. And so you need to use an identity and access management system and enforce policies that restrict these users, these members, these accounts, or these even resources that might be talking to each other. And then at the network security, one thing that's top of mind is a virtual private cloud, or a VPC. How do we restrict the ports? How do we make sure the right security groups are configured, and things like that? And another big topic is very important these days is data encryption. How do we encrypt the data either in transit, maybe over the internet, or maybe within the borders of a specific environment? How do we make sure that it's using TLS and that it's these communication lines are encrypted? or encrypting data that resides in a repository, an S3 bucket, or a data stream or a database. How do we make sure that there is some kind of either server-side encryption or client-side encryption that's being enforced? So those are things top of mind for security, identity and access management, network security. You can think of VPCs, as I mentioned, as well as data encryption. I'll pause there for a second, see if anyone has questions before I move on. Just monitoring the chat box too.
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
That's possible. Yeah. So currently, I'm a network security engineer and working on premises. So how is my job role going to differ if I convert it to a cloud role or something like that? I have a good understanding of AWS, okay, but I'm really struggling to know how is my role gonna differ, and what's gonna be my roles or responsibilities, if I can say.
Okay, so as a network engineer.
Yes, network security engineer.
Network security engineer. Yeah. So just to be transparent, right? I can definitely try to give my perspective on this, and Hadith, feel free to join. Hadith and I, we come from a security and compliance background. However, we interface with network teams and also architecture teams. If you are, for example, in an on-prem environment right now, or a non-cloud environment, and you're moving to a cloud environment, I think the network topography is going to all of a sudden become a lot more complex. But if you are working with, let's say, AWS infrastructures, this very important concept for networking is encapsulation or isolation, at least for customers. When customers want to spin up a workload, they'll create a VPC, and as either as a solution architect or engineer, you will help them construct their microservices in their environment within a VPC in an encapsulated way. So, in a way, you can abstract everything away from the corporate fabric, right, or from other environments or the public internet, because they can work within that encapsulated environment. When you talk about the corporate fabric or the corporate security and network, that's a whole different game, right? That's a whole different topic, and it gets a lot more complicated. There's different protocols, and you have the switches and the routers and the firewalls, and it's a lot more complicated. Probably that's not something that we would want to get into, but we can definitely connect you if you're very interested in this space. I can definitely connect you offline. We can connect on LinkedIn, and I can get you in touch with people either in an AWS networking capacity, or even just in general network engineers that can that you might want to talk to.
The issue is that as I started exploring AWS, I found my role is very limited. I mean, there's nothing much for me to do. If you understand what I'm saying, I mean, you just got to set up the VPC, and anyone with a basic understanding of networking can do that. And that's it. Security groups, anyone have a basic understanding can get
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And that's why I was saying it depends. There's two angles, right? If we were talking about customer workloads and them launching a VPC, right? Or are we talking about corporate fabric, right? And the network, right? For the actual, and that's completely different, because that corporate fabric will then support all support the entire business, right? And it needs to be very resilient. So that's different. And I think that is where, from my experience working with different compliance frameworks, that is where a lot of the complexity comes, right? And when you're as a network engineer, you might work on the corporate fabric and corporate, the corporate network, or you might be focused on helping customers architect their workloads. I don't know, Hadith, if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and a lot of the people who are moving from on-prem to the cloud, they have a lot of those type of questions, right? As a network engineer, a lot of the network engineers that I work with, they all came from on-prem. And really, when you think about it, AWS provides you with sort of out of the box software that you can actually manipulate and manage in the cloud to run and do the job that any, whatever you're doing on-prem, right? So for example, like a network engineer might use AWS DNS service to help customers with monitoring and identifying resiliency best practices, right? So that's where a lot of the customers want, right? They want resiliency. They want to make sure that it's being secured and well architected, right? And that is where it gets complex. For a company, let's say, imagine you're a network engineer within AWS internal, right? So you are supporting the AWS fabric. As a network engineer, there are more than 300 different services, customers running, all sorts of things with it on the cloud. Your role, really, you can decide, you can be, okay, I'm going to be someone who is going to be responsible for either ensuring that, our AWS environment is well architected. You can be customer facing. Customers come to AWS, and as a network engineer, you can provide well architected best practices, resiliency, monitoring environments to the customers. But really, to be honest, your skills will transfer. The only difference is the tools that you use on the cloud. They're more of a software as a service and managed services that you're going to use within the cloud. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Truly appreciate it.
And Tony, also, some of the aspects of AWS services that are considered networking services, let's say, for example, Route 53, there's different features of Route 53, right? Like, you might be specialized on DNS or DNSSEC, or you might be specialized on domain name registration, or you might be might focus on actually supporting infra DNS and our own, signing our own AWS services and not enabling DNSSEC for customers, on the public domain, for example. So there's a lot of different aspects, but we can definitely expand on that offline if you'd like to learn more. And even if you're like struggling to figure out really what is kind of like your value proposition in a AWS similar or cloud capacity. Looking at the chat box, there's a lot of links there. And we could probably
actually I share your LinkedIn and Hadith also, and then our groups for YouTube and Telegram and meetups, like in case someone wants to join us. So nothing to know.
Okay, sounds good. I'll move forward here with a few of the we covered security. I'll talk a little bit about reliability, performance, and then cost, and then Hadith, I'll hand it off to you. So for reliability, another one of the key pillars is, let's make sure we've made the decision to move to the cloud. We want to make sure that it's going to be resilient and there will be minimal infrastructure disruptions. The reason I say minimal, it's because it's inevitable. There will be a disruption. It's not a question of it's if, it's going to be, the question is about when. So we think about like blast radius is like, if something goes wrong, how do we minimize the actual impact that might be sustained in any failure? So certain concepts that in a cloud environment are very common are like fault toleration and redundancy. How do we construct our regions or our availability zones and select enough, design it in a way where there's always resiliency or active between availability zones, maybe within a region, or you can sometimes even choose to replicate across regions. So this concept of fault isolation and fault tolerance and just reliability, a reliable infrastructure is very important for the cloud. And then also limits. Sometimes you want to be able to set certain limits because you might have a peak season or traffic or something, and you don't want your system actually to be overloaded and overwhelmed. So you can create limitations and alarms and different things that will help prevent it from doing that. So that's kind of the reliability, and a lot of the reliability actually comes from AWS's responsibility of the infrastructure itself. So the data centers, the regions, the availability zones, AWS will take care of that. And I'll briefly talk about the shared responsibility towards the end. So another topic is the performance. And so when you create and then run your services, you want it to be efficient and scalable. So that means choosing the right, for example, Amazon machine images, or the right storage capacities, and the right the right instances, and that might be optimal in a specific way that you want. So we tend to think about things like selection and scaling as things that should be top of mind when you think about performance, whether you're doing auto scaling, horizontal scaling, and you just want to make sure that your services are able to expand and be elastic in a way that they can spin up new instances when you have, and then also can shrink when you are not using them, and optimize for the needs of your business. You might want it to be compute optimized or memory optimized or whatever. There's a lot of, that's where the selection piece comes in. When you start designing or choosing your instances or your storage or whatever it might be, you can there's a lot of variety in how you want that optimization to look like, which will in turn impact your performance of your services. And then the last thing is the topic of cost optimization. So in a on-prem environment or a traditional environment, a lot of the costs, the traditional IT costs, are capex, right? Capital expenditures. They're a long-term commitment that usually go on your balance sheet, and once you commit, it's sometimes hard to either sell or unwind that investment. In a cloud environment or even at AWS, a lot of the costs are expenditures or expenses. So OpEx, right? You pay on an ongoing basis for the capacity that you use. It can be very affordable depending on the usage and how you construct your your workloads. So that is like a fundamental change of the cost infrastructure. Instead of having a large upfront fixed cost, you can have some variable expenses, turn things off, turn things on, as you go and optimize. And then they have tools at AWS like budgets and cost optimization and these comparison tools that can help you drive that. So I kind of covered some of the 5 pillars. I want to just briefly talk about the shared responsibility at a high level, and then Hadith, you can jump into privacy. So there's an easy way to think about that shared responsibility. AWS or most cloud service providers will be responsible of security of the cloud, right? They will be responsible for the infrastructure itself, the data centers, right? All the data centers, making sure that they're up and running, there's power and energy and everything going in, the cabling, all that, and the racks are there to support your workloads, as well as some of the networking, right, and things like that, and databases. But when it comes to security in the cloud, customers are responsible for configuring their workload. So configuration is a big thing that customers are responsible for. Access, right, setting up IAM or identity access management, choosing the right encryption models, right, that will encrypt their data. So there's this shared responsibility, and sometimes it depends on the service that you're utilizing. But understanding that AWS is going to support the infrastructure, the bare metal, right, the physical infrastructure itself is a really good assurance to give to the customers, because then they don't need to worry about that. They can worry about spinning up the resources, configuring them, setting up access, and encrypting, securing that in a good way. So I'll stop there. We'll continue to monitor the chat, and I'll hand it off to Hadith, who will speak a little bit more about privacy and data and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Hisham. I think I'll give a brief introduction. So Hadith Ali, and I am with AWS. Hisham was my colleague. He's at Apple right now. We miss him dearly. When you I'll start with what I do, right? What I do, and I think a lot of you here are really interested in, understanding how can I create a career for myself and be proactive in setting the goals, and what are the opportunities out there that would help me, that I can really use, that would help me achieve those goals and find a career within AWS, right, or Amazon or any other cloud provider. And when Hisham reached out to me, I was like, hey man, it's short notice, but absolutely anytime that I can help our brothers with sharing our knowledge and anything, more than happy to help. So I am the AWS privacy. Really, my day-to-day job is creating, working with customers first who have questions around how we handle their data, in essence, their customers' data, right, that they store on AWS. So this could range from, a small company to, the government of, the Dutch government, for example. They could come and say, hey, we run, multi-tenant environment within AWS. Our regulators are becoming, asking us questions, or our users are asking, or, our customers are asking us questions around how you're using our data, how we are using that data. And since we store the data on AWS, we want you to really address that question, right? And so, I work, I interface with customers, I interface with regulators, right? Data sovereignty has become sort of politicized, right? Each and every government and a country and even states, each state within the United States, they're coming up with their own privacy, data sovereignty and data governance models, right? So, and so one of them is, I get to work with these regulatory bodies that are basically creating these privacy requirements that AWS customers have to adhere to, right? So, and a lot of the time, sometimes it's it comes up as a regulatory audit, or it could be an understanding of AWS and fact-finding mission that they're doing. But really, like, what I do is try to enable AWS position when it comes to privacy, to ensure that our customers are not impacted. And then the last part is working with our engineers and internal teams to make sure that we are basically translating regulatory requirements into actionable and implementation of how we handle data, right? So really, that's what I do end to end, right? So work on automation and working on ways to make sure that we are safeguarding the data, help our audits team with certifications, and as a privacy SME, address customer questions, work with regulatory bodies, anticipate the ever-changing privacy landscape across the world, so that we can be able to implement and provide the answers to our customers whenever there are changes to privacy across the globe, right? AWS is global, right? We operate in almost all, almost all countries. And you can imagine, keeping track of, data sovereignty and data governance requirements in each of the region that AWS, operates in. So that's really what I do. So how do I get here? How do I get to where I am, right? As a matter of fact, actually, I started in accounting, right? So when I was, in the university, I did 2 degrees, information system management and accounting. And I did 2 years of financial audits. So I was with Deloitte and Touche, and I was auditing Boeing and Microsoft. And then, I just really got bored. There was only ever going to be one way of doing financial audits, right? So I switched to risk assurance and security. And that's how we really I was doing a lot of audits, your security organization controls and ISO and all those stuff. And eventually, I focused my career on privacy engineering, which is where I am right now. So now, the issue of privacy within the cloud is very, very sensitive, right? There's a joke out there that says, a kid asks, his father, what are the clouds made of? And he says, a bunch of Linux, computers, right? And so you're basically storing your data in a computer or a server that someone else owns. That's pretty much it. So there is a lot of like, I wouldn't say mistrust, but everybody wants to know where the data are. A lot of the requirements are people who are governments, agencies, users, right? They want to make sure that their data, the biggest asset, is your information, right? And so the issue of privacy by design, really the whole principle is around being proactive and not reactive, right? Preventative versus remedial, right? And the 7 really principles are you have to be proactive and not reactive. Privacy as the default setting when you're developing or when you're architecting your environment on the cloud. You need to embed privacy into your design phase, your SDLC process. You want to make sure that full functionality, right? Positive sum, idea where you want to make sure that you accommodate privacy into your architecture, right? End-to-end security, right? The full life cycle protection from the time that you ingest data to when the data is no longer needed, right? Making sure that you're protecting that data with encryption and deletion and all that stuff. And then visibility and transparency. So keep it open, right? If you are storing someone's data, make sure that you're able to explain succinctly, what you do with that data, right? And then finally, respect user privacy, right? Make it user-centric. Make sure that you give them ability to be able to, understand that, hey, right? I want to be able to change the data that you have, the personal data that you have on me. I want you to delete it, right? I don't want you to transfer my data. I don't want you to use my data. So make sure that you're respecting the user's options and make it easy for users to be able to essentially manage their data. So really, that's really privacy by design principle that we work with within AWS. A lot of the implementation aspect of it for customers, Hisham, touched a little bit around the shared responsibility, right? Shared responsibility is sort of it's a sliding spectrum depending on the type of AWS services that you use. Your responsibility as a customer versus what AWS is responsible for changes, right? So if you use a lot of managed and software as a service services, a lot of the responsibility for safeguarding the data or protecting the data is going to fall on AWS, right? There will still be some responsibility for the customer, but just think of it that way, right? It's a shifting spectrum. There is no one model where it says, hey, if you use AWS, here's like the shared responsibility model that everybody follows. It's different for each customer based on the AWS services that they use. And so, yeah, really, that's the privacy by design. I've kind of explained to you my career, what I do, what the privacy by design entails, right? And I'll leave you guys with this, right? If you are interested in getting into the careers in privacy, more than happy to work with Paris and the team to provide more information. So let's see if anybody has any questions. I'll stop there.
Okay, actually, I have a question here. Let me ask you about this, because some of EMD people ask me about this. So if they have like their website or any kind of website, how it's easy to move to AWS service, and what's the benefit for them? Because now we're trying to get people involved more and more for AWS and try to bring the AWS to Yemen. So what's the benefit to be in AWS, and how it's easy to move from local server to AWS or any of that stuff?
I'll make a comment and Hadith add on. So it depends on the nature of the website. If it is a static website, they can certainly use S3 to host a static website. It's pretty easy. If it is more dynamic in nature and maybe it will not be static, then there will be other options that they can use some of the compute resources. It's not like a binary white or black question, but definitely using S3, there is a lot of capability to host static websites today, and it's relatively cost effective. If it is more of an elaborate website or application that they are trying to deploy, it might be a little more difficult. In terms of the benefits are kind of all the things that I talked about, right? Like the pillars, the reliability. Hosting on AWS is going to be great because you have the fault tolerance, the cost effectiveness, the performance. You can see those benefits in other cloud service providers as well, but it depends on how you you compare. You compare there's trade-offs. Moving to AWS, there's trade-offs and benefits that you need to assess, and we can definitely provide more information. But I would if it's a pretty relatively simple static website, S3 is a good option where you can host it on.
Yeah, Hisham, I can add a little bit more if you're done, Hisham. Okay, yeah. So really, the benefits is what I think as you're trying to convince people to move to the cloud, right? A lot of websites, if for example, like Hisham mentioned, a static website, like they use S3, for example, right? Which is low cost, right? But really, a lot of the benefits for moving to the cloud, not just for convincing someone to move their on-prem website that is hosted on-prem to the cloud, is the cost effectiveness, right? Like it's really just you pay for the compute power that you use, right? You don't have to be in long-term contracts or upfront commitments, right? There is a lot of companies that are hosting your website, and they basically make you get into contracts, right? You go to the cloud, you can basically just deactivate your account and you're done, right? Like no contract, right? With the power of EC2 and compute and storage, you basically pay for what you need, right? And you can actually build in all the different benefits. For example, like it provides you with traffic control and having load balancing to be able to scale up and down based on the traffic to your website, right? You can just say, hey, right, between this time to this time, I want to be able to use spot instances that would basically be spun up if the traffic goes up, right? Or specific time of the month, right? So that flexibility, cost effectiveness is the biggest one. But really more importantly is the reliability that Hisham touched on, right? You take advantage of the scale and reliability and the secure global computing of infrastructure of AWS, right? So it's basically built on the virtual backbone of AWS. You don't have to worry about some IT guy sitting, God knows where, to basically to really be responsible for your website. If it goes down, right? For example, if your website goes down, you have support, right? You basically be able to see the status of AWS services on AWS public pages, and really, right? It's a more mature, multi-billion-dollar business that you're basically hosting your website on there, right? And so high performance, and you can choose different technologies and state-of-the-art security that you can take advantage of that comes standard for AWS.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing, Faris, and then we can kind of get into the career paths and certifications. So from a performance perspective, I didn't expand too much on it, but like when selecting the actual service types you want, you have a lot of options with AWS. You know, if you want to have more of serverless compute like Lambda, or managed services where you're abstracted from actually having to really deal with it, you can do that. Or if you want a containerized environment and use some Kubernetes service, or something that's very portable and can be really beneficial to your applications, you can also do that. So there's different types of implementations in AWS to fit very, very specific business use cases. And there's variations within each service category. Let's say for databases, for example, you have many options within databases, whether it's Redshift or any of them, right? Aurora or RDS, any different, depending on what kind of database you want, you can have that selection and that variety. So yeah, so like I think what we could probably do, since we have right now 15 minutes, I'll quickly touch on some of like the career paths in tech or in cloud industry, and then Hadis, maybe you can take up the certifications and professional development piece and expand on that. So for just career paths, I don't know all the people that joined today, like what your academic background is, or if you're working, if you're a young professional, if you're like very early in career. I don't know the stages, but I'm going to assume that we have like a mix of engineers and security people and information system people, back-end developers, front-end developers. I'm sure it's a architects. It's a mix, right? And the reason I kind of start that way is because in the cloud industry, or be it AWS or Google, today the career paths has really expanded a lot. So if you're interested in programming and being a software engineer, you can do that, and you can build services and build features. If you're interested in helping customers architect and really be more involved with the solutions architecture, or even product management, you can do that. If you're interested in becoming a security engineer or a compliance and assurance persons like Hadis and myself, you can also do that, all the way down to things like sales and legal. And there's basically right now in the cloud industry or in technology, you can see almost all the full spectrum of both technical roles and non-technical roles. And if you are in a technical role, you also have different options, as I mentioned, architectural engineering, and things like that, or security, pure security guy or gal. So those are kind of some of the career paths, and it can be unconventional. Just because you started your career in accounting or in business or some science field doesn't mean you can't pivot and all of a sudden be all in and devoted to AWS or learning any cloud architecture. It depends on your curiosity and your motivation. So that's just some of the career paths I wanted to explain to people, because I think there's this misconception that like, oh, I don't have cloud experience, I've never worked with a cloud service provider, I'm not technical, and then people get intimidated. But there's a lot of different paths you can take within cloud or technology. So I'll hand it off to Hadis if he wants to speak about some of like certifications or even like motivations for certifications and professional development.
Yeah, thanks, Hisham. Absolutely. Just to piggyback on what Hisham mentioned, the cloud, the world is moving, or it's already really on the cloud, and it's a skill that everybody should really look into, right? You can be a software engineer and you go to AWS, and instead of building services, you end up being a solutions architect, for example, right? Or you can literally find yourself working on career that is different than just software development, right? And it's pretty flexible, right? To be able to as long as you have the fundamentals and the skills to be able to understand and apply it to the cloud, you have a myriads of different careers and roles that you can take on. So in terms of certifications, right, there is if you, for example, like if you really want, and this is specifically to compliance and cybersecurity, right? I would say, for example, like the network engineers and the Cisco certification, and for cybersecurity, you're looking at a CISSP being sort of like the gold standard, right? And so maybe before I even kind of mention the top certifications, to kind of start thinking about if you see yourself in a career in cybersecurity, why are they important, right? Really, the reason why is the same thing as doctors go and they have an MD next to, right, like to their name, right? It's really to kind of separate yourself and be an expert in the field that you're in, right? A lot of organizations would basically, a lot of the jobs postings would say, for specific to cybersecurity, they would say, hey, we want you to have at a minimum these certifications, right? Because those are the kind of the functional competencies that is required. You're not expected to be an expert, but at least you should be able to know the basics so that you can go and apply. And a lot of the stuff that I've learned is not through certifications, but really on the job learning, right? But really having a certification gives you a foot in the door, gives you the basics, baseline fundamentals to understand at a very high level, separates you from the rest of your colleagues in terms of if you apply for a job, a lot of the jobs would go with someone with a certification as opposed to someone that doesn't have it, regardless of really their competencies, or you have to go through the interviews. So really, certifications help your resume to stand out from the rest of the candidates, and gives you the ability to your LinkedIn page or your resume to be noticed. In terms of certifications, I would say like for cybersecurity, CISSP is the biggest sort of kind of the gold standard. I will say there are specific certifications for the cloud. In my case, right, I am actually going to do my CISSP, but I have Certified Information Security Manager certification. I did the Certified Data Privacy Engineer, and then I did Certified Information Privacy Technologies, right? And those are kind of like my certifications, and it's a good way to keep on learning, right? Getting certification is a good way to refresh and learn, in the ever-changing, innovative nature of the cloud and the cybersecurity world, right? So, I have some links that I can share, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more, depending on the domain you're interested in, and if you guys, I'm pretty sure most of you guys are interested in AWS, so the cloud practitioner is a great place to start, or the solution architect associate, or the professional suite. Those will give you a good foundation of the cloud, and then also certified information system auditor. CISSP is good, and something to just get you a baseline understanding of the cloud is a great way to start. So we have about 6 or 7 minutes. Feel free to ask questions, or just we can make it just a conversation if you have anything to talk about. Otherwise, you can definitely connect with us offline. And again, we wanted to express our excitement for what you guys are doing, and on behalf of Yemeni students, professionals, and just beyond that, just the community of people that are interested in AWS and advancement of their careers.
So I have a question. It's I don't know if you have time or not. It's more related to the AWS shared responsibility model.
Yeah.
And so basically, what I have noticed, I don't know if this is right or wrong, the more the customer have a management of the service, it means he need to do more security. And
Correct.
the opposite. So if you're using like any serverless, it means like you have to do less security compared to having more management. That's correct or not?
Yeah. So it depends on, it's a spectrum. So towards the left hand of the spectrum, let's say it's infrastructure. And by the way, AWS and most cloud service providers don't use these terms. I'm just using it as an example. So let's say it's infrastructure as a service, right? Like the full package look and feel you're working on, right? The customer will have the full look and feel. As a platform or service, they might be able to deploy some code or change access or manage the access, things like that. When you get all the way to software as a service, it's just a user interface or a GUI, right? But in general, the more workloads that are deployed and the closer to the infrastructure as a service side of the spectrum, the customer will have certain responsibilities. So the big things you should think about are configuration, access management, encryption, right? Managing their users and making selection, right? Like when I talked about performance, so actually making the proper selection of their resources is important. The underlying infrastructure, right? The networking, kind of the wiring, the data centers, for example, the upgrades and all that to the OS and patching and things like that, AWS will be responsible for. However, customers also have some patching and vulnerability responsibilities. And usually these things will be detailed more through specific spec recs, AWS calls them, or customer responsibility guides that they share. But I think, like, if I understand your point correctly, yeah, like depending on the workload that they design, if it's a serverless or managed services, AWS will be taking care of more things that the customer would typically be responsible for. But hopefully that answers the question. We can provide some infographics as well that spell it out. I can definitely send that to you guys. You might have seen it already, but there's some infographics that shows you that spectrum, and then the layers of the tech stack that start to get abstracted as you move to a SaaS solution or to the other side, IaaS solution.
Yeah, I actually, Hisham, I just I posted a link to a more updated GXP paper that I worked with my colleagues, which has the shifting customer responsibility, right? Right, and you'll be able. It's a more updated change in terms of how you should see shared responsibility model, right? And to what Hisham mentioned, you can see, depending on what you're doing, if you're using Amazon EC2, RDS, combination of 3 services, you're moving more to managed services versus infrastructure services, container services, your responsibility changes, right? So I've provided the link there, which is actually a more updated version of the shared responsibility spectrum.
Yeah, and that's one of the more most common ones right now that are used. That's like basically the most common shared responsibility chart you'll see. There's another one that shows the spectrum between IaaS all the way to SaaS, but this one's really good. And this, again, like when you look at the customer side, right off the top, access management, configuration, and then different levels of encryption. And then to summarize, the bottom part is the global infrastructure, our data centers, and then kind of like the software and hardware or the networking. So this is a really good thing, and it'll change. There will be nuances depending on the customer workload and how they select their their services. I don't see any chat comments, Fatis, but last call. If there's anything you guys want to talk about now, we have a couple minutes and even more time if you need it. Otherwise, definitely feel free to connect with us.
Yeah, I know, Hisham, I see a question on the chat. Is there a way we can connect with the host on LinkedIn? Definitely, right? I already saw a couple of people already added me to LinkedIn. Absolutely, feel free to connect and we can kind of provide you any coaching or provide you any information offline.
That's perfect. So if there are any more questions.
One last one, if it's possible.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm being the guy who asks a lot of questions. Sorry, guys.
It's good.
Actually, my question is related to the certificates. Okay.
Yeah.
So the certificates, do they give us the knowledge on how to interact with the customers and how to use the services, or they give beyond that to work with the enterprise itself? Like, if I have the knowledge of solution architect, will that enable me to work with AWS itself rather than just working with the customers? Or for me to work with AWS, it means I have to bring my own knowledge that I have acquired from my previous jobs and roles.
I'll take a stab at that. So the certifications, first you have the baselines ones, the solution architect and associate professional and the foundation principles, but then you have the specialty ones like the security and some of the other ones. There's, I think, 13 certifications. They, just because you take certification, even if you pass all 13, right, like the suite of certifications, doesn't mean you'll be an effective communicator with customers. However, that should give you knowledge, the knowledge base to communicate with them. Now, interfacing with customers, whether you work at AWS or in any job, is a skill in and of itself, right? You have to be delicate on how you create the messaging, understand, work backwards from their needs. So the answer is I think more. I would say the answer is no. Like, passing certifications doesn't guarantee that you'll be effective in working with customers, but it'll provide you the substance and the understanding to support your conversations, because you can dive deep into any of the services and help them market that. And then the beautiful thing about AWS or any cloud service provider, when you work with these customers or regulators or anything, you have usually teams to support. So you'll have SMEs in every domain, and you'll have account managers and technical account managers, in the beginning, and then when you get solution architects, you will have solution architects that focus on very specific microservices or domains, and it becomes a skill that you can hone and you can develop. Customer-facing roles are a very discrete thing, right? Not everyone is in a customer-facing capacity, because that's kind of like the bread and butter of the AWS business.
Yeah, and I would say really, like, each and the underlying foundational, like, sort of like the baseline cloud aspect. Google has its own certification, G Cloud, Microsoft Azure has its own certification. Solutions architect, the foundational baseline is the same thing, right? The services are different. Maybe you'll see different iterations of the technology, but mostly, right, it's the same principles, right? And I kind of posted, some, AWS, as Hisham had mentioned, certification paths from professional, associate, foundational. And this brings back a question someone asked at the start, like, how can I, take my network engineering for on-prem to let's say to the cloud, right? a good place would be really go and get into like networking, right? Certification. You will learn a lot of the principles, right? It's hands-on, by the way. You know, when you take the training for these more technical roles, they're hands-on, right? You'll be able to be, you'll be told to build, you know, a performant, durable, secure architecture, right? You know, and go, you know, as a specialty, you will go into more like advanced networking, right? Specialty, right? Which again touches on all the different elements. So that would be a good thing to do, really, right? If you are trying to move to the cloud, take the certification for one of the cloud certifications.
By the way, for the certification, I just post a link for Muhammad Al-Sharif. He is like the one of the expert from Amazon and AWS Egypt, and he created great videos about how to start with the certificate. If you just go deep in these videos, you can get the certificate, but it depends on how you're gonna train yourself. So just I want to notice this.
Excellent. Okay.
Is there any more questions? Okay, I don't think so. So thank you, Hisham. Thank you, Hadith. I appreciate your time and to be with us today with AWS CMN user group. This is the last meeting. I think we need to get the cert, to be announced from the AWS to start professionally starting the AWS Yemeni user group for the community. So thank you so much. Most people ask me why is this not in Arabic. So I'm gonna answer them by Arabic. بالنسبة لهذا الشيء اليوم حطيناه احنا بالانجليزي لانه معنا هشام وحديث الانجليزية عندهم افضل وعلى اساس انها تكون كحاجة رسمية اكثر من غيرها. So thank you guys, and if you have anything, okay, so I think we are done here. I appreciate your time, Hadith. I appreciate your time, Hisham, and let's be in touch.
Thank you.
If there's anything you want to finish with, you can go ahead.
We would just say that, you know, as you finish the prereq requirements for the user group, if you need any support, AWS, Hadith still works at AWS. I am no longer there, but I'm kind of like an alum and I can connect you guys with the people if you encounter any challenges, but I'm sure you already are in touch with the, you know, the user group, you know, teams. So, but anything we can help there, let us know.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna end the Zoom and then I'm gonna upload it in our channel group. You can find it in our links and all the groups. I have it, LinkedIn, Facebook, also in Meetup. Thank you and have a nice weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.